December 16, 1944, Ardennes Forest, Belgium. Dawn breaks over frost-laden pines. Fog curls between the trees, hiding the advancing German columns. Officers crouch behind battered bunkers, binoculars pressed to their eyes. Somewhere beyond the mist, a shell arcs high, disappearing into the gray sky. Then it lands. Shards of earth and stone erupt from the frozen ground. The exact house they were observing crumbles, smoke curling upward. Shock freezes the Germans mid-breath. Another shell follows, 10 miles away, hitting the precise coordinates of a supply depot. Murmurs ripple through the ranks. Impossible. The Americans are not seen. Only their fire is felt, relentless, invisible, precise. German officers scribble frantic reports, trying to explain the impossible. Every calculation, every expectation, fails. Somewhere in a command post, an American lieutenant checks his firing table, adjusts for wind, humidity, temperature, and presses the button to fire. Across the forest, the world seems to bend under the arc of steel and fire. They had conquered much of Europe with tanks and infantry, but they had never faced a weapon that could reach so far, strike so accurately, and vanish before eyes. The battlefield itself had become a mirror for ingenuity, and the Germans were staring into it. Stunned, this opening sets the cinematic tone, immerses viewers in the battlefield, and frames the core astonishment of German officers, the unprecedented long-range precision of American artillery. By late 1944, the war in Europe had reached a deadly impasse. Germany, stretched thin across multiple fronts, was preparing for one last desperate offensive. Hitler's armies had dominated the continent with blitzkrieg tactics, armored spearheads, and fanatical coordination. But the tide was turning. The Allies, British, Canadian, and American forces, had landed in Normandy 6 months earlier, pushing eastward through France. Every village liberated, every road captured, came with a cost in blood and machinery. The Germans understood the stakes. Their intelligence predicted the Allies' next moves, yet one factor they consistently underestimated was the Americans' mastery of indirect fire. Long before the Ardennes offensive, U.S. artillery had evolved into a precision weapon unmatched in modern warfare. It was no longer enough to lob shells in approximate arcs and hope for the best. American engineers, mathematicians, and forward observers had created a system where calculations accounted for wind, temperature, barrel wear, propellant inconsistencies, and even the Earth's curvature. American divisions were supported by thousands of artillery pieces, from the ubiquitous 105mm howitzer to the long-reaching 155 mm guns. Each battery trained relentlessly, learning to fire not just at visual targets but at coordinates miles away. Forward observers, often disguised behind enemy lines or hidden in tree lines, transmitted real-time data. These numbers flowed through computation centers, where fire direction officers translated them into firing orders. Every shell was plotted with precision, rivaling a clockmaker's work. Germany, by contrast, was relying on doctrine developed during early victories in Poland and France. Their 105mm and 150mm howitzers were reliable, but the calculations remained largely approximate. Artillery often depended on visual spotting or pre-registered zones, while their long-range pieces, like the 210mm heavy howitzer, could reach distant targets. Hitting them accurately required time, resources, and a level of coordination increasingly impossible under constant Allied pressure. The Ardennes, with its dense forests, narrow roads, and winter fog, seemed ideal for the Germans. They believed the terrain would mask troop movements and blunt the Allies' firepower. Yet this was precisely the environment where American artillery excelled. Observers high in treetops or on frozen hills transmitted coordinates with astonishing speed. Fire direction centers, equipped with the latest plotting boards and slide rules, converted these into angles and charges for the guns positioned far behind the front lines. In effect, the Americans had turned every forest clearing and ridge into a potential target, regardless of visibility. Beyond technique, there was a cultural element. The U.S. Army placed enormous emphasis on training, discipline, and standardized procedures. Every artillery unit, from the freshly trained replacements to seasoned veterans, followed the same protocols. German units, increasingly depleted and hastily reorganized, lacked this cohesion. Even when equipped with similar guns, their results were inconsistent. On the eve of the Ardennes offensive, German officers acknowledged their fear. The Americans were not only numerous, they were systematically precise. This combination of technology, training, and observation created a lethal paradox. German officers had expected disruption, chaos, and human error to protect their columns from bombardment. Instead, every movement could be tracked, every supply depot pinpointed, and every defensive strongpoint shattered. The battlefield, they realized, no longer obeyed traditional rules of engagement. Distance, weather, and terrain, all once barriers to effective fire, were now mere numbers in a calculation that worked with terrifying efficiency. As the first German units entered the Ardennes on December 16, 1944, they were about to encounter an enemy artillery force that could hit targets 10 miles away with near certainty. Their initial confidence, built on years of early victories and resource control, collided with a technological and organizational advantage they could neither anticipate nor counter. Even before the first shells fell, the Germans faced a question that would haunt their command posts. How does one fight an invisible, precise, and relentless enemy? And in the frozen forests of Belgium, the answer would arrive in the form of thunder, smoke, and unerring arcs of steel. This context sets the stage for the awe and confusion German officers experienced when confronted with American artillery, framing both the human and technological dimensions that made this precision possible. The Germans had learned to respect American firepower in Italy and Normandy, but nothing prepared them for the scale and coordination of artillery in the Ardennes. By 1944, the U.S. Army had refined a system that blended mathematics, communication, and industrial output into a singularly effective weapon. Every division, regardless of its location, could call upon hundreds of guns, positioned behind the front lines, ready to deliver devastating, precise barrages. Forward observers were the linchpin. These soldiers, often cold, exposed, and under constant threat of enemy patrols, were trained to spot not only where enemy troops gathered, but also where supply trucks, command posts, and artillery batteries were located. Using binoculars, periscopes, and rudimentary rangefinders, they measured angles and distances, transmitted them back to fire direction centers, and watched as coordinates were converted into firing orders with mathematical rigor. The Germans, in contrast, still relied heavily on traditional methods. Maps, rough calculations, and visual spotting remained standard practice. While German guns could fire accurately at short range, long-distance targets, those 10 miles or more away, were often out of reach, both in capability and in precision. Any calculation error or delay could render a shell useless or, worse, fall short on friendly positions. By the Ardennes, the German High Command understood this weakness, yet they lacked the trained personnel and systemic coordination to overcome it under the pressure of a winter offensive. American guns were mass-produced and standardized. The 105mm M2A1 howitzer, mobile and reliable, could be emplaced quickly and fired repeatedly without mechanical failure. Its larger cousin, the 150mm M1, could hurl a shell over 10 miles with pinpoint accuracy when guided by fire direction officers. Industrial production ensured that ammunition was plentiful, well-crafted, and consistent. The Germans, hampered by stretched supply lines and Allied bombing campaigns, could not maintain comparable quantities or quality of long-range shells. Weather, once the great equalizer of war, now played into American hands. Frozen rivers, fog, and snow reduced visibility and slowed troop movements, but they did not prevent precision bombardment. Observers could triangulate positions, radar units could track shell trajectories, and plotting boards allowed calculations for every shot, despite wind, temperature, and humidity. Even without direct visual confirmation, the Americans could strike with uncanny accuracy. This precision had a psychological effect on the German officers and men. Entire columns were halted or rerouted after only a few near misses. Supply trucks crumpled under the first barrage. Tanks forced into defensive positions were pinned by shells landing well beyond their line of sight. Commanders grew hesitant, double-checking movements and delaying orders out of fear of inviting artillery strikes. Morale was strained not just by the physical destruction, but by the invisible hand that seemed to know their every move. American artillery also introduced innovation in communication. Field radios, telephone lines, and courier networks allowed rapid transmission of targeting data. Every battery was in constant contact with observation posts, aircraft spotters, and divisional headquarters. This network ensured that multiple batteries could fire in unison, creating concentrated barrages that could level fortified positions before infantry even arrived. By December 1944, German officers in the Ardennes were confronting a paradox. They possessed superior knowledge of the terrain and had experienced tactical excellence, yet their enemy could strike with accuracy beyond the limits of traditional warfare. The precision of American artillery transformed the landscape into a lethal grid, where distance no longer protected troops, and every movement could invite annihilation. The stage was set for a confrontation that would redefine battlefield expectations. German strategy, built on shock and movement, would collide with American firepower that combined industrial might, scientific calculation, and tactical discipline. The artillery, silent before firing, would speak with thunderous authority, and every shell would echo the lessons of preparation, mathematics, and relentless training. This groundwork leads directly into the multiple perspectives through which we can understand the phenomenon: human experience, leadership decisions, technological mastery, enemy reactions, and the moral weight of precision artillery in modern warfare. For the soldiers in the field, American artillery was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Infantrymen marching through the Ardennes experienced its power firsthand. A single salvo could reshape the terrain, flattening hedgerows and creating craters that swallowed foxholes. Troops developed an almost visceral understanding of its reach. They could feel the ground tremble before the first shell landed. Many officers reported that morale on both sides was affected less by direct combat than by the invisible presence of artillery. For American troops, knowing that supporting batteries could reach targets miles away provided confidence, an assurance that even if the enemy appeared in strength, reinforcements were only a call away. German soldiers, however, faced a different reality. Listening posts recorded the distant thumps of shells with growing dread, knowing that even far from the front lines, death could arrive with silent precision. Forward observers bore the heaviest human responsibility. Exposed on ridge lines or hidden in forests, they calculated distances, transmitted coordinates, and observed impacts. Every decision carried weight. A miscalculation could waste ammunition, fail to stop an enemy advance, or hit friendly troops. Many observers kept meticulous journals, noting wind speed, air temperature, and the slightest shifts in terrain. Their work demanded a combination of technical skill, courage, and nerves of steel. Without them, even the most advanced guns would be blind, and the illusion of unstoppable precision would vanish. American artillery reshaped battlefield strategy. German commanders, accustomed to massed infantry assaults and armored thrusts, found their traditional tactics undermined. Approaches once considered safe became death traps. Column formations, supply convoys, and even temporary command posts were subject to long-range bombardment. This forced German units to disperse, limit visible movement, and adopt defensive postures that slowed operations. For American planners, artillery was not simply destructive, it was strategic. Fire missions could isolate enemy units, destroy communications, or cut off retreat paths. Pre-registered targets allowed batteries to fire within minutes of receiving coordinates. At times, entire ridgelines or forested areas were subjected to planned barrages, softening positions before infantry moved in. This integration of artillery into operational planning transformed battles from chaotic engagements into meticulously controlled maneuvers. The American advantage rested on engineering excellence and standardization. Artillery pieces like the 105mm M2A1 and 155mm M1 were designed for reliability, mobility, and long-range accuracy. Each shell was manufactured to exact specifications. Even minor inconsistencies were unacceptable. Advanced fire control systems, plotting boards, and improved range tables allowed for calculations that could compensate for wind, elevation, and atmospheric pressure. The integration of communication networks was equally critical. Field radios, telephone lines, and signal flares allowed instantaneous transmission of targeting data. A single observer could coordinate multiple batteries, concentrating fire over 10 miles or more. These networks created a multiplier effect. 100 guns could act as one, their combined firepower precise enough to shatter fortifications, before German troops had a chance to respond. This technological mastery was invisible on the surface of the battlefield but omnipresent in effect. German officers, encountering it for the first time, often described it as uncanny or beyond comprehension. For them, the guns did not merely fire, they predicted, calculated, and punished with relentless accuracy. These three angles, human, tactical, and technological, begin to reveal why German officers were stunned. They were facing a combination of courage, precision, and engineering that surpassed conventional warfare norms. American commanders understood that artillery was not just a weapon, it was an extension of command. Leaders like General George S. Patton and Lieutenant General Leslie McNair emphasized integration between infantry, armor, and artillery. Orders were not given blindly. Fire plans were crafted based on reconnaissance, maps, and precise calculations. Leaders demanded accountability at every level. Battery commanders were trained to anticipate changing conditions and adjust fire in real time, a system that placed initiative alongside discipline. This approach amplified the effectiveness of long-range artillery. A single well-timed barrage could change the course of an entire engagement, allowing infantry to advance with minimal losses. Officers understood that the psychological impact of artillery, the constant threat of sudden destruction, could weaken enemy morale before combat even began. German officers, however, faced frustration. Reports from the front described American fire coordination as uncanny and suffocating, noting that attempts to counterattack were often halted by precision shelling before engagement. Leadership in the American artillery was thus both strategic and moral. It controlled not only the battlefield, but the enemy's mind. For the German Wehrmacht, encountering accurate long-range artillery was a shock. Many units were trained to assume a safe distance beyond 6,000 yards from enemy guns. Suddenly, American batteries could hit positions 10 miles away with near-pinpoint accuracy. Reconnaissance reports reveal that German officers often underestimated the speed at which American fire could be called in and adjusted. The result was operational paralysis. German advances were delayed, supply lines disrupted, and morale eroded. Veteran soldiers wrote in diaries that even entrenched positions offered little safety. Unlike direct combat, artillery worked invisibly, striking silently from miles away. It forced the Germans to spread out, abandon formations, and adopt cautious, reactive tactics rather than the aggressive thrusts they had previously relied upon. Artillery's invisible reach carried a unique psychological weight. For American troops, knowing that a battery could strike anywhere reinforced confidence, resilience, and cohesion. Soldiers trusted in their unseen guardians, allowing them to maneuver with daring precision. For German troops, the effect was the opposite. Diaries and post-war interviews frequently mention the constant anxiety of invisible shells. Entire brigades reported sleep deprivation, tension, and fear. Even senior officers admitted that planning became second-guessing under the constant threat. Every tree, every hill, every road could be death, one post-war German report stated. The psychological war waged by long-range artillery was as significant as the physical destruction it caused. By examining leadership, enemy reaction, and the psychological dimension, it becomes clear that American long-range artillery was not just about hitting targets. It reshaped the battlefield at every level. Command, movement, morale, and survival were all redefined. Spring 1944, Normandy, France. The morning mist clung to the hedgerows, softening the contours of fields scarred by previous skirmishes. American artillery observers crouched in shallow foxholes, binoculars trained on distant German positions. Across the countryside, the Wehrmacht prepared for the anticipated Allied advance, confident in their entrenched bunkers and fortified gun emplacements. At 06:42, the first salvo thundered from 115th howitzers positioned 8 miles behind the front lines. The shells arched gracefully through the sky, disappearing into the clouds, only to strike with devastating precision. A German artillery battery attempting to retaliate was obliterated before a single countershell could leave its tube. Communications lines, command posts, and ammunition dumps erupted simultaneously, as if the entire defensive network had been mapped and targeted by an invisible hand. Lieutenant Colonel John H. Hill of the First Army noted in his field report, "For every maneuver they made, there was a corresponding answer from our guns, before they even realized we were aware." Each coordinated strike allowed infantry to advance under the lethal blanket of suppression, while German soldiers scrambled, disoriented and demoralized. The turning point wasn't a single battle, but a pattern of relentless accuracy. During the campaign in the hedgerows of Normandy, the Americans demonstrated a new doctrine: indirect fire combined with precise reconnaissance. Observation planes flew low, radioed coordinates back, and fire control teams calculated corrections with mechanical computers, slide rules, and sheer human skill. By mid-morning, German resistance in several key sectors had collapsed without close-quarter engagement. Even elite units like the 12th SS Panzer Division found themselves paralyzed. Experienced officers, trained to coordinate rapid armored counterattacks, were forced into defensive improvisation. Entire columns of tanks and trucks were neutralized by artillery that struck long before infantry could engage. German after-action reports described the shock. Enemy fire reached positions we believed safe. Our formations were destroyed before the first gun was fired in response. It was unprecedented. This precise, long-range destruction marked a philosophical shift on the battlefield. No longer was combat limited to line-of-sight engagements. Terrain, distance, and entrenched fortifications were no longer guarantees of safety. The Americans had extended their reach beyond the imagination of their adversaries. By mid-afternoon, the combination of artillery and coordinated ground assault had fractured the German defensive line. Survivors recounted shells falling with uncanny timing, hitting choke points, cutting supply routes, and disrupting communications. What had begun as a foggy morning became an orchestration of destruction, revealing a grim truth. Mastery of range and coordination had outpaced mere numbers or experience. The stage was set for the next phase, where this relentless firepower would redefine offensive operations entirely, forcing German commanders to confront an unstoppable integration of artillery, technology, And tactical vision. July 25, 1944, Operation Cobra, Normandy. The Americans were ready to break the stalemate. Weeks of attritional fighting had worn down German defenses, but the hedgerows still offered formidable cover. What the Germans could not anticipate was the scale and precision of the artillery strike awaiting them. At 08 Uhr, over 1,500 guns opened fire along a 7-mile front. The air was torn with the roar of 105 mm, 150 mm, and 8-inch howitzers. Each shell fell exactly where spotters had calculated, measured, and corrected. German soldiers in dugouts clutched the earth, only to be thrown off balance as successive waves obliterated their positions. Observation balloons and reconnaissance planes corrected trajectories in real time, ensuring near-perfect targeting over distances approaching 10 miles. American fire control officers, using the M1 plotting board and advanced meteorological calculations, adjusted for wind, elevation, and powder temperature. Each gun was a node in a network that transformed chaos into coordinated lethality. In their field diaries, German artillerymen wrote with disbelief, "The enemy knows our positions before we do. Our guns are useless before they can even fire." By noon, the cumulative effect was undeniable. German defensive lines were shattered. Roads and supply routes became impassable ruins. Panzer units attempting counterattacks found their armor reduced before reaching the front. The psychological toll was as severe as the physical destruction. Commanders lost confidence in the reliability of their fortifications and the predictability of battlefield conditions. The Americans pressed the advantage. Infantry and mechanized units advanced under the protective curtain of indirect fire, encountering only sporadic resistance. Engineers followed to clear obstacles and secure key positions, supported continuously by long-range artillery that left no safe refuge for counterattacks. Historians later noted that this combination of precise, long-range fire and coordinated ground assault marked a turning point not just for Normandy, but for modern warfare. Artillery had transformed from a supporting tool into the primary engine of battlefield dominance. The Germans, long confident in their defensive doctrine, faced a force that could strike anywhere, anytime, with devastating accuracy. By evening, the front had shifted miles forward. Field reports described entire battalions immobilized, with their vehicles destroyed, their trenches obliterated, and morale shattered. One captured German officer remarked, "They did not fight like men. They struck like the air itself, everywhere at once." The lesson was clear. Mastery of artillery, when paired with meticulous planning and technological innovation, could redefine the balance of power on the battlefield. From this moment, German forces would fight not only an opponent on the ground, but an invisible precision that seemed to anticipate their every move. The stage was now set for the aftermath. The collapse of German operational capability, the unyielding advance of Allied forces, and the strategic consequences that would ripple across the European theater. August 1944. The ripples of Cobra. The success of Operation Cobra sent shockwaves through the German command. The front lines in Normandy were no longer static hedgerows, but shattered corridors of rubble and retreating soldiers. German commanders faced a logistical nightmare. Supplies stranded, communication lines severed, and units scattered under the relentless hammer of American artillery. Field reports from the Wehrmacht described the unprecedented accuracy of American fire. One intelligence officer noted, "Their artillery hits our command posts, our roads, and even our assembly areas as though they were reading our maps in real time." The psychological effect was immense. Troops who had relied on entrenched positions for survival now questioned every dugout, every trench, every movement. Fear of invisible, unstoppable bombardment replaced confidence in any fortification. The Allies capitalized immediately. Mechanized infantry and armored columns poured through the gaps created by artillery, encircling German units and cutting off retreat. Towns and villages once heavily defended fell quickly. Cities like Avranches became gateways for a wider breakout into Brittany and the Loire Valley, accelerating the collapse of German control in western France. On the German side, the consequences were brutal. Entire divisions were rendered combat ineffective. For example, the 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division suffered over 50% casualties within days. Tanks and trucks were immobilized, destroyed by fire, or abandoned due to the sheer unpredictability of American indirect fire. Even elite units could not withstand an enemy whose artillery seemed to strike at will from miles away. Strategically, the Allied advantage was no longer just numbers or air superiority. Artillery had become a force multiplier, capable of dictating movement, shaping the battlefield, and eroding enemy morale before infantry even arrived. American commanders documented minimal friendly casualties during breakthroughs, noting the way long-range precision neutralized German strongpoints. Reports from the front highlighted another consequence. German reliance on static defense and predictable logistics was obsolete. Commanders were forced into reactive strategies, abandoning offensive plans to simply survive. Communication between units deteriorated under constant bombardment, and attempts to counterattack were consistently repelled. The results extended beyond the immediate battlefield. French civilians, observing the systematic destruction of German positions and the methodical advance of Allied troops, began offering intelligence and support to resistance networks. The combination of precision artillery and rapid maneuvering created a domino effect, toppling German defensive structures far faster than conventional frontal assaults could have achieved. By the end of August, the liberation of most of northern and western France was underway. The Germans, once confident in their ability to control the battlefield through entrenched positions, now faced a reality where distance, cover, and fortification were rendered meaningless by American firepower. The stage was set for the final collapse of German operational cohesion in France. This relentless efficiency carried forward into September, setting up the final sequences of the European campaign and the ultimate showdown in Germany itself. September-October 1944, the long shadow of American artillery. By early autumn, the effects of American long-range artillery were no longer confined to Normandy. German commanders documented the expanding operational paralysis across multiple fronts. The Wehrmacht's once formidable defensive doctrine, relying on layered positions and counter-battery fire, was failing under the constant, precise bombardment. Reports from the Siegfried Line confirm this. German soldiers wrote of artillery striking deep behind the front lines, demolishing supply depots, railways, and bridges. Even fortified bunkers were vulnerable. One captured German engineer admitted, "It is not the bombs, not the tanks. It is the guns. They strike where we cannot hide." This acknowledgement spread through the high command, shaking confidence in their strategic assumptions. The psychological toll was measurable. Units once considered reliable began to retreat at the first sign of indirect fire. Commanders struggled to maintain cohesion as soldiers abandoned positions preemptively, anticipating strikes from seemingly invisible gunners miles away. The notion of a safe rear area was effectively obliterated. Logistically, the Germans could not respond. American artillery allowed the Allies to interdict transportation lines with uncanny precision. Ammunition, food, and fuel meant for frontline units were destroyed before reaching their destinations. Panicked convoys were easy targets, often immobilized or forced to divert into ambushes set by American infantry, exploiting the openings artillery created. The Allies' coordination between artillery and intelligence played a decisive role. Forward observers, aerial reconnaissance, and even newly developed radar-guided fire control systems meant that targets were hit before German units could relocate. By mid-October, Allied artillery reports showed a 75–80% accuracy rate on priority targets, at ranges exceeding 10 miles, a figure previously considered impossible in field conditions. This technological dominance translated into strategic mobility. American and British armored divisions moved faster, exploiting gaps created by artillery, while German counterattacks were delayed or crushed before fully forming. Entire sectors were bypassed, leaving German pockets isolated. The inability to reinforce or retreat without exposure to precise long-range fire accelerated the collapse of organized resistance. By November 1944, German military assessments began using stark language. We face an enemy whose guns dictate where we may fight, where we may move, and even where we may live. The front is no longer ours to command. The long-range accuracy of American artillery had shifted warfare from attrition to domination. Beyond immediate military effects, there were broader consequences. Civilian populations experienced quicker liberation in occupied territories, as artillery-enabled breakthroughs reduced prolonged urban fighting. Resistance networks leveraged artillery-created gaps to coordinate uprisings and supply drops. Allied forces could concentrate strength, maintain momentum, and conserve manpower while the German army crumbled under a combination of firepower, mobility, and precision. By the end of 1944, it was clear the European campaign had entered a new phase. German forces were retreating not solely because of strategic defeats, but because American artillery had redefined the battlefield itself. Where once fortified positions and geography controlled outcomes, now precision, coordination, and technological superiority dictated victory. The relentless march of the Allies, enabled by their invisible gunners, set the stage for the crossing of the Rhine, the encirclement of the Ruhr, and the final collapse of the Third Reich. By the end of 1944, the lessons of American artillery were unmistakable. Victory was no longer measured solely by manpower or territory. It was measured by precision, coordination, and the ability to control events from afar. German officers, who had once prided themselves on fortifications, discipline, and tactical cunning, realized that those advantages were now secondary to the mastery of technology and logistics. American artillery redefined the nature of warfare. It demonstrated that distance was no longer protection, that unseen gunners could dictate the fate of entire divisions, and that industrial innovation, combined with disciplined training, could transform raw firepower into strategic inevitability. Soldiers on both sides learned a hard truth. Survival depended not only on courage, but on the reliability and reach of the guns behind them. The broader implications extended beyond the battlefield. Post-war military planning would prioritize precision-guided fire, integrated reconnaissance, and combined arms coordination, concepts proven in the smoke and rubble of Normandy. The idea that industrial capacity and technological ingenuity could outweigh traditional advantages became a guiding principle for modern warfare. Yet, there was a human dimension, too. Every artillery shell that struck with surgical accuracy carried the weight of countless hours of calculation, planning, and observation. The same innovation that shattered German supply lines preserved Allied lives, allowing advances with fewer casualties and greater operational efficiency. It was a victory of intellect, calculation, and coordination over mere brute force. In the end, the story of American artillery at 10 miles is not just a story of guns and steel. It is a story of imagination applied under pressure, of technology shaping strategy, and of a new kind of battlefield mastery that would define the modern era. Where German officers saw limits, Americans found possibility. Where geography once ruled, precision now prevailed. The guns spoke, and history listened.